Right, I think we're set to start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's policy dialogue on carbon farming. What role can it play in reaching net zero, which is hosted by the European Policy Center and supported by Sarvio, a BASF company. My name is Michele Galli. I'm a visiting fellow at the EPC, and I will be moderating this event today. To today's topic now. As the EU accelerates its climate action agenda, carbon farming has emerged as a promising yet complex tool for reducing agricultural emissions and enhancing carbon sequestration. The agricultural sector is responsible for approximately 11% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. And with intensifying climate crisis, the pressure is on for the sector to reduce its carbon footprint and adopt more sustainable practices. Carbon farming, whereby CO2 is removed from the atmosphere and stored in soils and plants, represents an opportunity to turn farmland into a carbon sink and benefit farmers with financial incentives. The EU has already developed several policies that support carbon farming, including the Common Agricultural Policy and the Carbon Removal and Carbon Farming Certification Regulation, which establishes a EU-wide voluntary certification framework. There are also a number of other policies existing and upcoming that could further shape the future of carbon farming in the EU. However, challenges remain, including monitoring and verification of carbon farming, potential trade-offs with biodiversity and food security, but also a risk of reversibility of sequestration gains and of greenwashing for emissions that could have been reduced at the source. With the upcoming negotiations for the Common Agricultural Policy post-2027 and the Commission about to unveil its vision for agriculture and food and clean industrial deal, today we will discuss how carbon farming can contribute meaningfully to the EU's climate goals while ensuring fair benefits for farmers. So please allow me to welcome our distinguished guests for today's policy dialogue. Krystyna Holzleitner, Head of Unit at Low Carbon Solutions, Land Economy and Carbon Removal at DG CLIMA. Edwin Michiels, Vice Chair of Working Party on the Environment at COPA COGECA. Thomas Schilling, Managing Director of BASF Digital Farming, and Krystyna Springer, Senior Policy Analyst, Land Use and Climate at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. After an input statement from our panelists, we will open the floor for Q&A. You are welcome to ask a question by raising your hand. Please state your name and affiliation, and remember to indicate who you are posing your question to. So without further ado, I will now turn to Krystyna to start off the discussion. Given the array of EU policies that support carbon farming, could you please provide an overview of how these frameworks collectively regulate carbon farming in the EU?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. And yeah, I start then with our top law, which is the climate law, and which tells us that the European Union should become climate neutral in 2050. So for this, we need to reduce our emissions from industry, from energy, also from agriculture, across all sectors. And we are on a good way in doing this, thanks to the rollout of renewable energy. But when we look towards 2040, 2050, we'll always have emissions in the system, not least from the production of food. We'll always have emissions from fertilizers, from livestock, for the production of food, from the production of biomass. So we'll also need to get better in actively getting more CO2 out of the atmosphere and storing it in our soils, in our forests, in the products that we make out of the biomass, like in building materials, wooden buildings, chemicals, and so on. And at the end of the value chain, we need a certain amount of the CO2 put into the empty gas fields of the North Sea, so where we've initially taken the carbon from. So what I find so exciting, if you think about these 2040, 2050, we should have value chains that are good for the climate, because they actively use the CO2 from the atmosphere in producing these products, and they put a certain share of that also back. So the key performance indicator in the future should be about how much carbon can we bind in our value chains. And this is true for the biomass, but this is also true for the food. So how can we produce in the future our food such that more CO2 is bound in the soil, in the biomass, agroforestry, and so on, but then also along the value chain. We'll always have residues. There will be always food waste and so on. And that will be a source of CO2 that we then need for the industry, that we may need to produce biogas, e-fuels, as a feedstock for the chemical sector, for the construction sector, and so on. So it's new value chains. It's an economy without fossil carbon. So we need to get much better at managing these other carbon cycles. And to get there, we are taking the first steps now, which would be the certification, this monitoring, reporting, verification. We need to get better in seeing which management practices, land management practices, have which effect on our emissions, on our removals. And this we need to understand better. And this is why we are starting off with the certification framework for carbon removals and carbon farming, right? Where we also tackle carbon storage in buildings, these permanent carbon removals, bioenergy for CCS, direct air capture for CCS, and so on. But also the carbon farming. And here we are looking first still at emission reductions. We still need to get better at reducing emissions, in particular through the rewetting of peatlands. Drained peatlands are the biggest emission source that we currently have on land. So we need to get better at that. And this is a methodology that we are developing. We need to get better in soil management with agroforestry, hedges, and so on are a big topic. And then, of course, forest management, afforestation. How do we better use our marginal unused land? So for us, it's very much about, I'm a fan of this landscape approach. You really need to look, how can we better use our land? So how, if several farmers get together, look at it, okay, where can we, which land is best for what? We need more biodiversity, we need more resilience, we need a better water management. How can we get that together besides the climate benefits? But I think that's kind of the good thing, is that a lot of these management practices that we are looking at are good for climate, good for biodiversity, good for fertility, good for resilience. And we should privilege those management practices that tick all the boxes. And this is what we are looking currently at with the expert group in developing these different methodologies. We've already been out with first drafts in autumn. We've got a lot of feedback, very useful feedback. So we hope that we can have the second version around Easter. And if everything goes well, maybe we can adopt them by the end of this year. And then maybe if we also get everything else right, can start the certification, so help the voluntary carbon market, help the food processors to have their more credibility, better information for farmers, easier access by 26, 27. And by 28, we should have this European-wide registry. So I think what is very important for us when we develop that is that we are useful, that this is a benchmarking system, an MRV system that can work for the value chain. A lot of the big food processors are now looking into, okay, how can I reply with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive? Everyone is trying a little bit of a different approach. So here we really want to help and to provide that data, that it works for the CAP, and that it works for the national greenhouse gas reporting. Because only if we have one information system that works on all the levels, we will be successful, and we can save a lot of red tape. And as you know, simplification, big topic for this this commission. Now, with all the digital tools, with all what we have and what we can leverage, I think that there's really a big potential there. But then, of course, where does the demand come? And a lot of or the financing, because a lot of these measures and also the more effective ones like rewetting of peatlands really require quite a significant change in land use. And I understand a farmer will not do that only because he gets an eco scheme for 1 year. There needs to be an expectation that there is a reward for the next 10, 20 years. And this we know very, very well from industry. So any chemical producer, any steel company, these are big investments if they want to switch to hydrogen, if they want to do CCS, and so on. So we need to provide that certainty there. So, and this is why we are doing studies, why we are trying to see and to discuss with you, okay, could it be a good idea to develop a carbon market for the agri-food supply chain? So voluntary for the farmers, the ones who want to go ahead, the ones who have a potential for that. And then you could have different demand for these carbon farming credits, which would be a voluntary carbon market. But you would need a more predictable demand. So should we see from the food processors that through the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive or also through other commitments, obligations to see, okay, I reduce my Scope 3 emissions over the next 10, 15 years by so much. Member states, or also we as a commission, could be purchasing those credits, or then maybe you could also open up that market for actors outside the value chains, airlines or others, banks, financial institutions that need some offsets for green claims. And that could make sense maybe also for those actions like rewetting of peatlands when I really take land out of the agricultural production. So there are many possibilities, and we are very happy about all the good discussions that we have when we're doing this study. So this is where we are, what we are discussing, and then one will also see how all of that fits into the agri-food vision that should come next week.
Thank you very much for your introductory speech. Indeed, very interesting and insightful. We've heard that if we are to reach net zero and meet climate targets in the EU, we are going to need all of those things, including developing a value chain around it, better monitoring, reporting and verification, reducing emissions. But it's also good to hear that there is a roadmap as far as the registry is concerned for this benchmarking system, and remarks on the nature of how would be the inclusion of the agricultural sector in the emission trading scheme in Europe. Speaking of which, I would like now to turn to Edwin, COPA COGECA, from the perspective of farmers and agri-cooperatives, if you could discuss what are the key opportunities and risks that carbon farming presents for European farmers.
Great, thank you. First of all, it's a privilege to join you today to discuss carbon farming, an essential tool in Europe's fight against climate change and the cornerstone of sustainable agriculture. Carbon farming represents a great opportunity for a large part of the agricultural sector. It provides our farms with solutions for climate adaptation while enhancing our economic resilience and economical sustainability. And it provides our society a service through the realization of negative emissions. Today, I will try and provide you with an overview of the impact of carbon farming on agriculture, highlight the support provided by the EU's policies and financial tools, and share ideas on how these can be further enhanced during the upcoming institutional cycle. Carbon farming could be a game changer for society, enabling farmers to sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improve biodiversity. Practices such as agroforestry, peatland rewetting, and precision soil management not only contribute to climate action, but also enhance soil health, protect water resources, and build resilience against extreme weather. Carbon farming is the only emissions reduction and carbon sequestration route that provides such a broad and impactful range of ecosystem services. It's the only way to capture carbon in soils, without the use of technology, but that uses natural processes instead. This dual benefit, environmental and economic, is why carbon farming is critical. Farmers are not just producers of food, they are stewards of the land. With the right policies and incentives, they can lead the EU's climate transition, benefiting rural communities and ensuring a sustainable food system. Carbon farming has and can have profound implications for agriculture. When it comes to economic opportunities, carbon farming opens new revenue streams through carbon credit markets and public funding. This diversifies farmers' income and makes their operations more resilient. For cooperatives, this creates opportunities to scale climate-friendly practices across regions. When looking at enhanced soil and ecosystems health, sustainable practices improve soil organic matter, increasing productivity, while at the same time reducing reliance on chemical inputs. Healthier soils are more fertile, are more resilient to drought, and are better able to store carbon. You can strengthen the rural development. Carbon farming supports job creation, knowledge sharing, and innovation in rural areas. By working with cooperatives, farmers gain access to advisory services, group certifications, and shared expertise, amplifying their impact. And when you look at climate resilience, agriculture is on the front of climate change. Carbon farming practices such as crop diversification and improved water management help farmers adapt to increasingly unpredictable weather patterns, safeguarding our EU food production system. The EU has taken important steps to integrate carbon farming in its climate policies. However, there is room to enhance support and ensure these initiatives to fully meet farmers' needs. Streamline the certification process. Certification frameworks must be simplified. Farmers already face a huge administrative burden under the existing policies. Overly complex systems risk disencouraging participation, especially amongst the small-scale farmers. Simplifying certification and leveraging cooperative structures for group certification will ensure a broader adoption amongst the farmers. Financial tools beyond the cap, beyond the common agricultural policy. There needs to be financial instruments outside of the cap, such as grants for innovation, training programs, and subsidies for early adopters. These mechanisms will ensure farmers receive fair compensation for their contribution to the climate action without compromising our food system or the affordability of food as a whole. Support the early movers. Many farmers and cooperatives have already adopted carbon farming practices, demonstrating leadership in sustainability. These early movers deserve recognition within the certification framework. Policies must accommodate their contributions without penalizing them for being ahead of the curve. A clear legislative framework. Clarity is required on a number of legislative issues. For example, the interaction between public and private funding in carbon systems, carbon farming projects, and liability mechanisms should be addressed. Over-reliance on delegate acts creates uncertainty. Farmers need stable, transparent rules to plan long-term investments in carbon farming. The carbon farming game is not for a short period, it's a long-term game. Key legislative elements must be clearly defined in the primary regulation to build trust and ensure stakeholder confidence. Make carbon credits future-proof. As we see it now, carbon credits rely on a voluntary market, and that market has a limited lifespan. At the moment, it's only the above legal sustainability market that allows us to make value of carbon credits. When everything goes well in Europe, that market will dwindle. We have to have an answer for that, because otherwise we stuck with just the consequence of the Kyoto Agreement that there is no voluntary market left if everything has come to place. Protect the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector is looking forward to a robust system, enabling us to trade carbon credits with other sectors. What we do not want is an exchange of negative emissions with other sectors, because otherwise you will be ending up selling the farm to make room for an airport. And I don't think that's what we want to have and what we want to do. One size does not fit all. Our beautiful EU is diverse. So are farmers, so are regions. Regionally, there are large differences and many environmental factors affecting the effectiveness of carbon capturing methods. There is no one solution that fit farmers equally well under all circumstances. The upcoming institutional cycle presents a vital opportunity to strengthen carbon farming policies and tools. Financial inclusivity, mixed funding models, combining public and private resources are essential to incentivize widespread adaptation. Simplification for scalability. Certification must be practical, must be simple, and must be accessible, especially for the small farmers. Complexity hinders this participation, and we should adopt and leave no farmer behind principle when it comes to reaching those sustainable goals. Smallholder engagement and recognition of cooperatives. Farmers, cooperatives, and local authorities must be central to the conversation. Co-creating policies with those directly impacted will ensure solutions that are practical and effective. Cooperatives play a key role in scaling practices, providing advisory services, and reducing administrative burden for their members. Their contributions must be explicitly recognized in the EU frameworks. Innovation and knowledge transfer. Investments in research, advisory services, and digital tools will equip farmers with the skills and technologies needed to adopt carbon farming practices successfully in the day-to-day business. Equitable baselines. Frameworks should reward early movers and ensure farm fairness for all farmers, regardless of when they adopted sustainable practices. Closing, a vision for the future. Carbon farming is more than a policy tool. It's a movement towards a sustainable, resilient future. It positions farmers not as part of the climate problem, but as leaders in the solution. As we refine our farm work and funding mechanisms, let us ensure that we reflect the realities of the farmer, support the vibrance of rural communities, and stay ambitious in our climate goals. Together, we can make carbon farming a European success story, one of innovation, collaboration, and a hope for this thriving planet and a thriving Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we heard that there are quite a few opportunities and also a number of risks that come with carbon farming. With the most prominent opportunities that we've heard is the wide range of ecosystem services that carbon farming can provide, and improving soil fertilities and yields and job creation. But we also need to deal with the complexity of certification that could be burdensome on farmers, as well as the lack of finance, including public-private funding, and the importance of the co-creation of policies with the ones that are the most affected by it. So on this point, considering that there is another player playing a major role, that is the industry in carbon farming, I will now turn to Thomas Schilling. From an industry viewpoint, can you please tell us which innovations hold the most promise for supporting carbon farming at scale, as well as on-farm sustainability?
Thank you, Michele, and welcome and a good afternoon also from my side. So I'm representing here Xavio Digital Farming Solutions, which is a subsidiary of BASF, part of our Agro Solutions business. I would like to give you an overview also of the tool set that we today already have in our hands, really to tackle these questions, which definitely drive the society, which drives the policymakers at the end of the day, but foremost the farmers, right? At the end of the day, they are the ones that have also to deliver then into these carbon farming schemes and to make it really acceptable for them, to make it handleable for them. That's something which requires tools, but it requires also a sustainable framework, which has a permanency also not only of carbon capture, but also of the rule set of the legislation around. So let me go a bit into detail here, just a bit of background to us. So how can we get to the next slide? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay. For us, it's foremost critical that solutions for the farmers have to address the whole cycle of crop management. So farmers have a cropping system, farmers live in a cropping system, farmers do everything from planning to seeding to harvest, and a tool set like ours have to support it. Carbon farming lives from new intervention schemes, but it foremost lives also from data. So MRV schemes need data, and this comes into play that you have to combine management practices that are digitalized, because at the end of the day, that eases also the burden to the farmer really to collect data. And we are coming from the angle that first step is really going into a more digitalized way to run your farm, which gives benefits on its own. You see, we are active in different markets. We choose them on purpose because you have to be near to the farmers. You have to apply practices that are suitable for each and every country, because even not across just Europe, but also worldwide, farming practices are different. Also, the go-to-market is different, how you can address farmers. So that's something also which we see here. And we're coming also with track history now from 10 years of working with a specific portfolio in the markets, but more than 25 years also with several foundations, both in the fruit and vegetables, as well as the broad acre crops of companies that are spin-offs of university, with the knowledge also how crop growth is running. That's predominant, because at the end of the day, really to shape the future from the step to mechanization now to a predictable farming, which gives you science-based evidence how to optimize farming, is critical. And this comes with multiple dimensions. Just to show a bit what digital farming means, and then I will make the bridge also to carbon farming. Farmers do not want to intervene a lot with digital, and we see also an adoption hurdle, right? So it's really like, as you have mentioned also, it's not running on its own. We can show a lot of benefits also in terms of tangible results for the farmers, but at the end of the day, to step really to bring a full farm into a digitalized mean is perceived as a lot of intrusion into the day-to-day business of a farmer. But in principle, it's not. If we really look how we handle this, you need just minimal touch points. The farmer has to say, okay, what has you sown? What kind of seed have you used? What was the seeding date? A lot afterwards is done just by sensoring, right? We can use satellite data, we can use weather stations, we can use data from farm machines that really give the insight into the fields. This not only helps the farmers really, and our engine also, to optimize the business, it helps also in documentation, and is also then something which is not so intrusive into the farm day-to-day work as farmers might think. Core of our approach, but also that's true also for the industry approaches here of digital decision support systems, is really that models prepared by agronomists, proven by field trials, really can show how you can make the difference really to optimize inputs, right? One is really the best timing, the best product, but also the best situational applying on soil, for example. Soil is not same in every region of your field. You have different soil zones. You have to obey them. And with this agronomic decision engine, how we call this, you can optimize the way how crop inputs, is it nutrition, is it the way how you place seeds, or how you can apply crop protection at the end of the day can be optimized. And at the end of the day, also you need to bring it to the machine. So a close connectivity to the different brands that are out there in the market is key. And this is a foundation also to drive this kind of business, because at the end of the day, to optimize it, you have to address all job steps. We even go a bit beyond, because we also have seen adoption just of a digital tool is not enough. We have seen that servicization is the key. Farmers need to get help also to bring also this digitalization to reality. We have one product which even gives a guarantee somehow of reliable protection of your field, because then the farmer has really the trust. Okay, if they even give a payback, if their models fail, that instills a lot of trust, but also with a servicized offering, also together with distributors, together with agronomists, also together with machine partners even, we can then ensure that the farmer is taken by the hand really into the new world of digitalization. What does it mean in terms of benefits, right? We can show with different field trials across the world really that there are different kinds of benefits. It's partly it's production optimization, which goes either to higher yield, or which goes also to input reduction. And this really means tangible results without being even incentivized also with any kind of carbon credits. So already the optimization of farming is one critical element which digitalization of farming can bring. The link to carbon farming is then for sure also that you now can combine this one. Once you have your farm already in such a scheme, which gives a benefit on its own, then you can also utilize the data, then apply the additional practices where also the farmer need to see, they need to play around, okay, which kind of cropping system, which kind of cover crops, which kind of intervention change also to my standardized systems will be with which effect, and then incentivize this on top. This gives the diversifying of the input streams, income streams, which is also critical for farmer for the resilience. But as you can see, the solutions that are out there in the market, ours, but also from competitors, they pay on their own in principle if you look into the effects also of input optimization and yield. Nevertheless, also we have to truly admit also adoption is still in its infancy. So digitalization is not self-running even the benefits are clear. To lower than the mission, I think you might already have had a lot of touch points also with what kind of means carbon farming will have, but you see the different interventions here. It's on one hand also the whole part of optimizing nutrition. It's definitely also a lot about soil health. And it's also reducing tillage schemes, ideally no-till, direct seeding. Partly it's really a new journey for farmers. They know from the whole history somehow since 30 years how to run their conventional business. It's also a matter of really doing the step, also trust into these new regimes. And that's also where partners, both from the advisor side, the distributors, us also as solution providers, have really to convince the farmers, okay, this is something you really can do. You should at least start also maybe with a portion of your farm, which we see also farmers do a stepwise approach. Partly it's taking them 3 years really to understand how really to roll it out to the full farm to get the trust, but it's really working. And then once you have them in the scheme, I think that's something when we then giving the right policy environment, which should be stable. They should have also not only them, but also us, by the way, also to have the right schemes implemented here, that we are compliant with the legislation frameworks, that the farmers can also trust that these new practices they adopt to are really reliable also for the future. They can adopt to the new schemes. We have several projects that we run. One example here is also so-called CLIMA Partner Landwirtschaft, which is from Germany, one scheme, but we have several ones also from Ireland to Italy and in different other countries, Japan, for example, where we can showcase together with partners from the food value chain that we can already make it actionable. So as I said, solutions like our field manager portfolios out there since 2017, so several years already in the market. With those climate project, carbon farming projects, we are running now around about 2 seasons now where we make them really in practice. And that's something where we're starting with several thousands of hectares at the moment, but that's something now really also to grow. And as said, the pickup is really dependent on the framework. So this voluntary market somehow has to shape. Also for the big value chain players, it's often not that they for sure go all in at the moment. So it's also kind of experimentation phase. And so I think that's something why we should also together somehow discuss how we can get the framework really to promote this further. So ideally, and that's a bit also the prototype, which we're currently completing, the farmer really has its farm in such a system, and then he can already choose from different projects, from different offerings that the market has for them. There will be also kind of play also that different food chain value partners can position their programs there, and the farmer then can select which to join, and then they can see what kind of benefits they have. And it should be maybe a mixture of definitely, as I said, digital farming pays out on its own, but then also for the farmer to have this additional income stream to see, okay, how can I position my production, not only just my commodities yield sales into such a scheme, and then also give a multifaceted income stream. So be more resilient, and also even strengthening the structures also of small size farms, right? It's not that you must have this big mega farm really to make it work. Traditional family farming will benefit a lot of this. We see this also with the changes in the structural setup. Partly farmers really are not able to inherit the farm inside the family. So some neighbors might take over, but still to keep the structures, also the rural structures up and running. Then it's even possible with digitalization that even a family farm can then operate not only 100 hectare, but 300 hectare here in Europe, or depending on where you are, different sizes. But that's something with digitalization, we still can keep the existing structures up and running for food resilience in Europe. So we truly believe also that this must be scientific based. So really relating to WERA and gold standards somehow, so that we have really proven schemes. And also what we see that this must be an ecosystem. So for sure, we're working then also with partners also to do the certification, and we can also, or we are working also on both schemes. So one is in setting also for the wood value chain industry, but on the other hand also to create carbon certificates based on these standards for offsetting as well. That's something where, yeah, we are also strongly looking also to partner really with the different value chain partners on one hand, on the other hand, also with our peers in the industry, as well as then also with the farmers and the farmers corporations really to drive this forward.
It's perfectly timed. Thank you very much. This was also very insightful. We've heard that digitalization and data plays a key role, and that on two fronts, actually. On the one hand, to optimize the amount of resources that are needed to produce our food, and on the other hand, it also presents an opportunity, technology and combination of technology and data, to reduce the carbon footprint and provide an additional stream. Very interesting developments as far as the platform is concerned, and I believe we all agree that we need global standards for monitoring, reporting, and verification. Now turning to Krystyna for your final input statement. From the perspective of a policy analyst, could you please share with us any other challenges and opportunities that carbon farming could bring? And in particular, if you could discuss the potential trade-offs of carbon farming with biodiversity, food security, and rural livelihoods.
Thanks. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this discussion. I should start by saying that when discussing the challenges and opportunities of carbon farming, it's really important to acknowledge that there isn't still full alignment in what people understand carbon farming to be. And we need to be quite specific in terms of which carbon activities we're talking about. So I will focus on carbon farming as it is currently defined in the CRCF. So verbatim, their activities related to land management that increase carbon storage by enhancing carbon capture or reducing the release of carbon to the atmosphere. So there are three key types of practices that have already been mentioned that I'll discuss and sketch out some of the opportunities and challenges with respect to both environmental and socioeconomic impacts. And then I'll finish by making a few points on the sort of broader picture and how that sits against the background of the broader climate objectives. So if we start with climate and biodiversity, of course, it's particularly worth emphasizing the mitigation potential of peatland rewetting. We have the potential for really high emission reductions on a per hectare basis, and it can be partial rewetting with continued agricultural production, so paludiculture. So we raise the water table, but still have certain types of crops growing on that area, and that brings benefits for biodiversity as well as resilience, providing water filtration and flood control services, among others. A second carbon practice is with a high potential is agroforestry, and has many of the same crucial benefits when it comes to climate resilience and biodiversity. There are a few trade-offs for other ecosystem services, although some of the issues that can pop up are regarding the tree species that are picked for these practices, and the introduction of intensive coppicing systems. So when timber is sold on into the bioeconomy. When it comes to agroforestry, it's mostly contributing to carbon removal in the biomass rather than the soil carbon. There can be an increase in soil carbon, but it depends on the region and the specific design of the system. Which brings me to the third major category, which is managing soil organic carbon in mineral soils. And here again, maintaining soil organic carbon levels does help in terms of improving soil structure and soil fertility. There are benefits in terms of water management. But the extent to which carbon sequestration in agriculture, and specifically mineral soils, can contribute to climate change mitigation is sort of more subject to debate. There are several estimates on the sort of overall global or EU mitigation potential. And there are several reasons why there are large discrepancies between those estimates. A key point that's worth highlighting is that these estimates often don't account for the fact that soil organic carbon saturates over time. So not only is there a maximum storage capacity in soil, but also the rate of sequestration drops as that capacity is being reached. Then there's, of course, the issue of non-permanence, which I'm sure everyone will be aware of. In practice, unlike carbon in trees, which will tend to just persist on its own, soil carbon is not something that farmer can just add to the soil once. It has to be maintained through continuous practice. So as a result, we sort of see that the estimates of global mitigation potential in mineral soils in literature published in the early 2000s, associated, for example, with no-till or changes in grazing practices, they've been revised down quite significantly in recent publications. And moving to the socioeconomic side, of course, supporting farmers' livelihoods is a key consideration in the context of discussion on transition to more sustainable practices. I should say I've been really minimalist on the slides, so I'll come to this slide. This is my only slide. I'll discuss it at the end. But coming back to the socioeconomic impacts, of course, carbon farming can be seen as a source of a range of economic opportunities. They've been touched on already. It's quite consistently emphasized as a sort of new green business model in many EU documents and strategies. And this is both carbon farming providing additional income streams by itself. So we're talking, for example, using crops from polyculture in insulation, as well as this idea that's really central to the CRCF, which is the idea of carbon farming credits as an additional product that farmers can sell together with food or biomass. And so in order for this to happen, it needs to make financial sense. And Krystyna has already touched on this. So if we're relying on certification, there really needs to be a regulatory environment that's creating a demand for these certificates. And possibly there might be a need for a price to be guaranteed, for example, by a public buyer. Of course, we need to also consider MRV, transaction costs, the need for upfront investment, and it's really important to also remember about the non-financial barriers. So the knowledge intensity of many of these practices means that a lot more intensive provision of advisory services and knowledge transfer is needed. And there's also a question regarding who benefits from the sale of certificates. And there's probably a need for quite robust safeguards to make sure that incentivizing carbon farming doesn't favor big players and increase the risk of land consolidation to allow for economies of scale. So there may be a real risk that what is framed as a key opportunity for farmers at large sort of transforms into predominantly an opportunity for large actors or even asset managers or investment holdings. The last aspect that's often brought up in the context of these discussions on climate mitigation options in agriculture is, of course, food security. The term can be understood in various ways, and I'm not going to go into this, but a couple of aspects. One of them is, of course, just agricultural productivity. We can talk about yields. There is sort of mixed evidence in terms of the impact on yields. It, of course, depends on practices, but we've heard there's been some positive experiences from Thomas. And of course, in some cases, carbon farming involves also taking land out of agricultural production, which is why it's important to take this into account. There's a risk of displaced emissions and indirect land use change. And this brings me to the second aspect of food security, which is self-sufficiency. There's a lot of talk around this. This isn't necessarily a risk that we're running at the moment. The EU continues to generate big production surpluses. What is a central challenge in this context is the significant dependence on imported high-protein animal feed. And this is despite the majority of EU agricultural land already being used for animal feed at the moment. So if we're talking about self-sufficiency, reducing meat production, coupled with production systems that are a lot more efficient in terms of feeding practices and livestock management, are really the solution here. And this brings me to the final point and to the final slide. And this is on the sort of overall climate mitigation issue and the contribution of carbon farming understood as it is at the moment within the carbon removal certification framework regulation. So there are some very significant components to that concept of carbon farming. Peatland rewetting is one of them, but there are other activities that are unlikely to be scaled up without a significant ramp up of advisory services, significant volumes of public and private finance. These activities, of course, bring a range of really important benefits in terms of resilience, biodiversity, etc. But in terms of the overall climate mitigation picture, so you can see on the slide, hopefully it's clear enough, the emissions from croplands and grasslands, which is where the majority of what we're talking about here in terms of carbon farming, that's the sort of green stacked columns at the very top. So this is the volume of emissions that's associated with it. So this is what we're sort of dealing with. Of course, there's a discussion whether what the sequestration potential there is. There might be potential for removals that's much larger. But then if we look at the bottom three stacked columns, so the orange, purple, and blue. So the orange is just enteric fermentation from cattle, manure management in purple, and emissions from fertilizer use in blue. So you can see the discrepancy there. And this is just to point out that we have the CRCF framework coming together, which is a very welcome development, which will support continued removals. And we have the CAP, which we have seen from recent assessments primarily supports carbon sequestration, but we are missing this policy element that focuses on emission reduction. So I think I'll just finish on the point that I think the main challenge associated with carbon farming is the risk that in the context of discussions on agricultural emissions, it takes priority over the debate that we need to have on emission reductions with respect to agricultural methane and nitrous oxide. So it's about how do we ensure that farmers are rewarded for the sustainable practices that need to be introduced while not diverting the focus and resources from emission reductions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krystyna. There was a nice overview of some of the trade-offs that are involved with carbon farming. We have heard that for carbon farming to unlock, or better said, to unlock carbon farming's potential for delivering multiple ecosystem services, then that depends inherently on the kind of species and type of practices that we use, and that there are a number of hurdles that stand in the way of carbon farming being picked up by farmers, including the need to, with regulations, to create demand for certificates, and the need for more advisory and upfront investment. And we also heard that quite a lot of emissions in the agricultural sector could be dealt with at the source. So the focus should rather be on adapting our practices to a more or less resource intensive and less emitting agricultural sector rather than mitigating them. Thank you very much. These were the input statements from our guests. I will now open the floor for questions from the audience. If you have any. Just to briefly remind you, yes, you can raise your hand. The microphone will be delivered to you. Please keep it short, state your name and affiliation, and indicate the person you are posing the question to.
Good afternoon. I'm Tobias Kreisam with the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. I would like to pick up on what you just said, Ms. Springer, in terms of the need to have emission reductions. You showed the slide, and enteric fermentation is there. It's significant. Now, methane is a short-lived climate gas, and you mentioned the issue of permanence as one of the challenges and it's also being used as an argument not to, at least at the beginning, in the short run, to include carbon farming credits in a compliance market, just because of the issue of non-permanence. How would you look at balancing, let's say, methane emissions, short-lived methane emissions, with, let's say, non-permanent storages in a compliance framework? That's one thing. Another thing is, if we need reductions and we do in emissions from livestock, what about including emission reductions then also in the carbon farming framework, which has been kicked? Last question for Mr. Schilling is, now you had this little label with the UNFCCC, and so I'm sure you followed the COP in Baku, and one of the things that came out of Baku was a agreement on the global compliance market. So that actually offers farmers the prospect in the future to sell compliance credits to countries that would adopt that, say Norway or Switzerland. Why should farmers then sell to BASF and not perhaps at a higher price to a compliance market in Norway?
We can start with Krystyna and then move on to Thomas.
Sure. So in terms of balancing methane emissions and impermanent carbon removals, I just want to address, there's one issue that sometimes comes up in these discussions, which is the fact that methane doesn't last in the atmosphere for particularly long. It's a span of sort of 12, 20 years. It's often used as an argument that it results in the cooling of the atmosphere, which is sort of a little bit of a misinterpretation of what actually happens. And the argument that we tend to put forward in this context is that if we actually assigned the warming potential to methane in line with how long it stays in the atmosphere, we would see a lot higher emissions in this chart. So this is an issue that does need to be dealt with urgently and cannot be balanced because it's seen through this prism of impermanence as carbon removals are. In terms of integrating the two in the same system or the fungibility of the two, there are discussions about this that we're having as part of the discussions on a potential trading system in agricultural emissions. Obviously, there are precautions that need to be taken. I think many people would argue that any sort of safeguards in terms of buffer pools or discount factors that allow for accounting for that impermanence are not sufficient to allow for that fungibility. But yeah, I'm not sure if I actually answered your question, I think.
Has she? So your question? Or do you have any follow-up question to that?
Oh.
Please continue, Thomas.
Okay, then let me take the last one. So we are mainly the facilitator for the farmers, really, when we create credits that they can get sold on the market, not specifically to BASF. So it's more the scheme. So we are handling that whole process. But even with our whole portfolio, we are so-called agnostic. So we are smartening with the production, not specifically our own BASF CP and seeds portfolio. So therefore also here, this is a model which then either for insetting is incentivized as the food value chain partners will pay then at least the farmers for that one. And we are the facilitator here as well as also for carbon credits or any kind of other schemes that we are enabling that one. And definitely charging for the technology itself, but not specifically that this is in-house set price.
Are there any reactions from Edwin and Krystyna on this point? Otherwise, I will move on to the next question. We had one there. Yes, please.
I think there was maybe a question about the inclusion of emissions in the CRCF. Is that right?
Yes, there was.
Which I don't know if Krystyna, you want to talk to.
Yes, we will already in the scope of the current methodologies for the soil management and agroforestry, we will look at fertilizer emissions, and we will start in the second half of this year looking at livestock emissions, which are not part of the scope currently, but which co-legislators asked us to already develop a methodology for potential inclusion with the next review of the framework.
Yes, Frédéric Simon from Carbon Pulse. Question for Christian Holzleitner, I suppose. Just to refresh our memory about the CRCF and the methodologies which are being developed for certification. So I understand the Commission starts first with the permanent methodologies. So when will you start addressing the less permanent methodologies and the ones for carbon farming, and which ones will be the first? Do you have a timeline?
Very much have a timeline. We've already started last year with putting out the first drafts for a series of permanent removals. So direct air capture with CCS, bioenergy with CCS, and biochar. So biochar, you immediately have the link also to agriculture, because you can put it on a field, or you can use it, for example, as a building material. So biochar is quite flexible. And we're working towards classifying biochar rather as a permanent removal. Then we have carbon storage in buildings, where we're looking at the methodology of bio-based materials in buildings as a temporary carbon storage of at least 35 years. There we haven't yet put out a full draft methodology, so that should come during this year. And on carbon farming, we've put out the draft methodologies on the rewetting of peatlands, afforestation on unused land, and soil management with agroforestry. So on all of them, both for the permanent removals and the carbon farming, we will follow up in the second quarter with the version 2.0 of all these methodologies. We'll discuss with our expert group, and depending on the feedback that we get, we've already got a lot of feedback on the first version, which we are very thankful for, and which was super useful. Let's see whether the second version already hits the spot. It's already good enough so that we can go forward. So from our side, we would be keen then to move towards the adoption of the delegated acts for these methodologies this year. In parallel, we are also looking at an implementing act for all the verification rules that we need for the third-party verification in particular, and then also the rules on the certification schemes, so that we could also finish that implementing act this year, so that from next year onwards, certification schemes could apply with us, and the certification could start, and then we go towards the European wide registry in 28. So from our side, we are quite ambitious, but also we have to see what are the views out there on the proposals. But we are very much building on the best practices that we see. Maybe also to mention in terms of the permanence, or we have the specific approach to carbon farming of temporary units. While for permanent removals, carbon removal is valid over several centuries, and there are the rules of the CS directive, carbon capture and storage directive, that guarantee that one. For carbon farming, we look at units that have a limited lifetime, maybe for agriculture 5 or 10 years. So not to make it too difficult for farmers to enter that. But these, of course, they can always be prolonged, because of course we want the farmers to stay in the business. So we find that quite an attractive feature of our framework that also, I think, fits well with some innovative approaches under the Scope 3 reporting. And yeah, so by that, we hope that we can already manage the permanence risk here very well. Then we are also very open or very keen to develop for further insurance. So there's also some very innovative approaches. And we think overall, as a lot of our, particularly in agriculture, as a lot of the management practices that we want to promote will effectively reduce risks because they make the soil more resilient all over, better water management and so on. So this should be overall quite low risk. And if we have a good monitoring system that we see and the good financial incentives that the farmers continue, I would overall see there a very, very low risk. But of course, you need to be clear, and what we are in the framework is that our certification will only be valid as long as the farmer continues to carry out that practice.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was already quite, yes, there's a follow-up question.
Yes, just a quick follow-up. So how does it work with those short-term credits? Are they cancelled and taken out of the market or prolonged if the farmer then continues? Can you explain how it works?
So we would, of course, hope that the farmer continues, so that this is always prolonged. So we see, I think, one of the main markets, or the one who would be, I think, most interested in these units are within the food value chain. So we are already, we need to see with our colleagues that are responsible for the corporate sustainability reporting directive. How do we then integrate here these more temporary credits and manage that appropriately? We also need to put out the rules on our registry, but co-legislators have been very clear that we really need to follow every unit that we issue in the registry until the end. So we will be very, very transparent about that. We also have to see the interest by financial institutions, by insurances that, of course, could buy a portfolio of those units and provide the appropriate insurances there. In this respect, we will also have a workshop in May, June, where we will look at the different possibilities, how our certification can be used for innovative financial instruments in the voluntary carbon market. But we also see an interest from financial institutions that they could use that with impact financing, bonds, because it will be so important. I mean, what we are doing, we are only doing the certification, and we are doing the certification ex post. But we need innovative financing models that, of course, bring already the finance to the farmers for doing the upfront investments, because some, as I said, some of these changes in practices are quite substantial, also require investment, capex, and so on. So we are very interested to engage with the financial sector, also to better understand, okay, how could there be also forward contracts, advance payments, what is the interaction with the common agricultural policy that, of course, can also finance a lot of these upfront investments or the advisory services. So there's still a lot to do also to design the optimal financial package to ensure a high uptake then of these carbon farming practices.
There are any more questions from the audience? Otherwise, yes, there's another question back there. And the gentleman over here.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I'm Marlene. I'm from Carbon Market Watch. My question goes to Mr. Holzleitner and Ms. Springer. I was wondering how you view the interaction between the CRCF and the CAP.
Of course, important questions on the additionality and how do we incentivize both the financing from the CAP as well as then the additional financing from a private market. So we've in the first version, for example, on our agroforestry methodology, we put out that idea is that the CAP could finance, so to say, the investment costs for the trees, for the hedges, and then the revenues from the certification finance the maintenance of that. I think that's like one of the main risks that you currently have in models, in particular for carbon farming credits with an unlimited validity. It's not about just buying the hedge; it's about managing the hedge across the lifetime, and this is something that that works better with the certification, because often the common agricultural policy, the eco schemes are only valid for 1 year, maybe often over some of them also over the 7 years, but not longer. And I think what we are all looking forward is a change for good in the farming practices. So that's an important aspect that we need to look into carefully. We have like for example with permanent removals, we already have some experiences on the state aid. For example, the financing of the district heating plant in Stockholm, it's based on bioenergy with CCS. Here we already have a full financing model between public and private sources and the voluntary carbon market. So that's also something I think where we can learn a lot for how do we combine public funding and new private additional income in the agriculture field.
Please, Krystyna.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, Christian's already mentioned quite a few aspects. Another one would be whether there's value in the CAP supporting a more universal rollout of MRV that could be built on to support certification. We could envision different avenues. I don't work for DG Agri, so I don't know if that view represents what the conversation at the Commission looked like at the moment. But we have a member state that has introduced very basic MRV as part of their conditionalities. There are examples of eco schemes that involve MRV requirements. So this can be taken as a precedent for sort of more universal approach across the EU. And then, of course, really boosting the services that are being financed currently through the second pillar. So the advisory services, knowledge provision, and supporting the investments, as Christian has already mentioned.
Quite a hot topic, financing carbon farming. There's also another follow-up question I would like to ask, but first of all, I wanted to take a question. We had a question back there and another one here in the front.
Hi, is that working? Hi, Oliver Hendrickson from the New Zealand mission to the EU. My question is for Thomas around some of the design, but also Christian, I'd be interested around how the kind of design principles of this market could work. Are you envisioning for ensuring the integrity of these units? How would, in a scenario where perhaps a farm has been found after several years not to be sequestering the levels of carbon that it had been accrued with units, that it would then have to surrender units, or if they chose to leave this market, would they also be then managing, a full unit liability to surrender back to, I guess, the regulator? So if they've accrued 20 years worth of carbon, they decide to leave, is that now reflected in the land value and they'd have to then surrender those units back and exit? I was just wondering around how that, managing the intricacies of how a market could work and how you participate, entry and exit. So thank you.
I think this definitely comes also somehow with the setup of the CSCF and other legislation frameworks, or even from the voluntary market also, how also companies that use insetting, for example, also handle this. So for sure, that's a question of permanency, but I also think that for the reality of farming, somehow you need some kind of confined timelines, because to talk about 100 years and then maybe even payback later and so on, that's definitely something also difficult to handle. We see this even with some schemes. So talking to farmers here in Germany, for example, we have some extended cropping schemes that are incentivized in some federal states, for example, but then how strict are the rules, right? If you have maybe a rotational scheme of 7 crops, and then 1 year the climate weather conditions are not in favor of the 6th crop, will you then lose everything, right? So I think there must be some more adoption to reality of farmers' practices somehow that also should take care of that. But let's say we are not setting the rules in terms of what really is being incentivized, other than we have maybe some own schemes that we set up, so then we can handle this. But maybe we are mainly with a facilitator also to implement what's accredited either in the voluntary market or with the specific value chain partner. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, that's also where we see also this emission reduction has also, to my opinion, also not this issue of permanency, because every production cycle has its own logic, right? And I think that's also, I think, where you can really do it very confined even to one crop season, that certain aspects also should be incentivized. So therefore, then you don't have this issue. I think it's more if you want to sequester it in the soil, then definitely if you have release, then after some years, because you have maybe some changes in the way how you practice, that's also not that easy to handle. I think that's something where also then the frameworks outside have to adopt this, as already mentioned by Krystyna here. This answers a bit the question, but.
Indeed, thanks a lot. And this also links back to the issue of co-creation that was raised earlier, and engaging farmers were the ones who were then expected to implement it. Did you have a reaction from Holzleitner?
Yes, so just to say, in a bit more technical terms, the farmer generates the removal, so there's carbon stored, that's measured, that's monitored. We will issue in the registry certified unit. So with kind of this contract, the farmer guarantees that the carbon stays in for another 5 or 10 years, which is called the monitoring period. So during this period, if something happens, or if during this period the farmer decides, I stop this, don't want to do this anymore, he has an obligation to substitute that. So I would think in the long run, the most efficient solution would be an insurance. That, because insurers very well know, I mean, they already insure farmers for the harvest and then everything. So they very well know about the risks. And as I said before, a lot of the practices that we are promoting should reduce overall the risks. So I don't think that this will be a very high premium. But for that, we need to build up that insurance market. So the current solution with voluntary schemes is that you don't sell the full amount of what you generate. So you have this buffer. Of course, it's much more efficient if you hold the buffer at the level of the certification scheme, because then you can pool the risk, and then if something happens, you take that in. As I say, I don't think this is so much an issue for agriculture. I think it's a bigger issue for forestry, because there you just have the risk of wildfires that you, even in the best managed forest, you still have, and you have to deal with.
Very much. And then we had a question here in the front.
Yes, thank you. Benjamin Franke from BASF. First of all, thank you to the speakers, very interesting. Question for Mr. Holzleitner. So one of the barriers we see is we need to get farmers to take up carbon farming schemes, and they need to have a long-term perspective. And you made some very encouraging comments about the value chain there, which is also where we are looking. And you mentioned the CSRD. So I was wondering if that is just collateral, or if the Commission is looking at reporting schemes like CSRD and others strategically, and how they can be utilized or leveraged to support that development in the value chain.
We're actively reaching out to a lot of the food, or we also get approached by many food processors that are now for the first time doing their reporting under CSRD, and are recognizing the challenges that that are there. And I think that we can help with a lot of the work that we are doing, for the certification, but also the work that we are doing with our member states on the overall reporting on our greenhouse gas inventories, because member states should, until 2030, move to what we call Tier 3 reporting. So the aim would be that by 2030 we should have emission factors, removal factors for the different types of soils in a region available. So our colleagues in the Joint Research Center run for us like a big program to have a first really soil map all over Europe, where we would get, by machine learning from all the available data that we have, standard emission factors. And that could then further on always be improved. And of course, if these standard emission factors would be the standard baselines that we use under our certification, that the food processors would use as a standard value for the Scope 3 reporting, as I said, we could have one single MRV system that fits everything. And I think this is our ambition, that we want to go there and work there. And I think we should have the ambition of this, that farmers have to submit data only once. So currently, I think everyone is trying to do different things, and it's getting maybe a bit too confusing. So this is something we should, over the next 5 years, we should be trying to simplify that. As you know, the Commission is also keen to simplify overall the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Proposals will come very soon, and then we also see how that fits there. But I think overall, we need to have, I think, more specific rules on the Scope 3 accounting in the agri-food value chain, as well as for biomass value chains. I think that will be helpful for everyone.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, digital soil map and simplification to stimulate and promote farmers' engagement and interoperability, which is otherwise an issue with multiple entry points for data and lack of a clear picture. We have another question. Yes, please.
For DPC, just wanted to ask Edwin, in particular, there have been, I mean, we heard a number of initiatives, a number of topics here on financing, on insurance, I mean, on digitalization, of course, on reporting. And it's a long list, the list goes on. But just wondering, I mean, in the end, it all very much boils down to the farmers and their practices and what is practical, what is feasible, what are the prospects and challenges. So just, you know, if you have any reactions or any points to what was discussed now, and what policymakers also and different other stakeholders should be aware of and mindful now when we are developing this agenda. Any key points you would like to raise? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When I look at it, there is a lot of expectancy from the food chain, which end up, in my perspective, with a consumer willing to pay for everything that's being done at a farm level. If we don't take care, and I think I believe I heard Krystyna talk about that as well. If we don't take care, the system will drive farming towards large-scale farms, because they can sequester carbon and attend to the needs of the food chain more efficiency than small-scale farmers can. So that would be one of the concerns I would have is, are we building a system that's going to have us in Europe ending up with just large-scale farms? And if that's the consequence, is that what we want together as a society? And another concern I would have is about data. The systems are going to be data-driven, and I heard Mr. Holzleitner say, well, the farmer has to submit the data only once. Maybe you could think about adding value to that data and not just add value to the carbon stored in the soil, but add value to the data that is going to be delivered from farm level into the food system as a proof of how environmentally friendly the food is being produced as a revenue. Because everything you give away for free, it's out of your control, it's out of your hand, and that would be a shame if we don't think about that. And one thing piqued my interest, that was about the carbon insurance. And I would advise, seeing as we have a lot of cooperatives in the agricultural world, to look at carbon insurance, if we can do that as an agricultural sector, as a mutual insurance, because it's not hitting all farmers at once if there is something happening. So maybe a mutual system could be a very good solution to address the dangers of not being able to sustain the carbon in the soil as a first reaction. But thank you for the question.
A lot, quite some relevant points regarding how to prevent further consolidation in the food system in Europe, and how to make the most of this simplification in terms of data entry, also to create an additional revenue for farmers. Yes, there are two more questions. We have one here in the front and one in the second row. If you could please facilitate the mic.
Hi. Edwin from Equinor. A question as to technology. In forestation, avoided deforestation, afforestation, technology is getting better and better on satellite imaging to monitor actually that a ton removed is a ton removed. It's, I can imagine, far more difficult in the below ground carbon stocks and what is going on there. What's your, maybe to BASF, to Thomas first, and maybe Mr. Holzleitner, if you have views on that, is your feel positive that we will get there technology-wise to come to the right MRV on that space? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. So I think we're also working with some other we are exploring also with some other companies what is the opportunity space, both with satellite operators as well as also with some other companies working on that front. And currently, to be honest, I do not see that this is really scientifically credible enough to do this really from remote sensing specifically in the soil, because normally you need radar data, which is not high resolution enough really to go to field levels where you can do it on a hectare scale, on a sub-hectare scale, even if you're talking about some countries. We talk about Mediterranean region, small scale farming in Germany, Bavaria, for example, or we are active in Japan. So that's definitely currently still an issue where maybe even some also maybe request to ESA somehow to also go more into, again, more optimized radar coverage here to have maybe some better suited signals also to do this. What you can do is maybe work on derived data, right? So definitely see that you have another tracer that indicates more what's happening in the soil. But also here, I think that some more work needs to be done. So definitely we use a lot of remote sensing data also to ease then the means of digital farming. But yeah, let's say optical and also near infrared spectroscopy is also subject to cloud coverage, which is also increasing due to climate change, by the way. So we had 4% more humidity in the air also in last year, according to the climate change already. And this is also giving more burden even on remote sensing. So that's something also to counteract. And this will be even increasing in future, I assume. So I think it's still a combination. So soil probing must ideally become more simple. We also optimize this because that's quite a cost and also a burden to this whole scheme. But currently I see it still as predominant technology still. Maybe some more better suited quick tests somehow that are credible enough really to do soil probing would already help. But also midterm, I would see that's even something even request also for ESA programs or like Copernicus also to go more into this soil monitoring.
Yeah, a lot is happening there, but it always will need to be a combination of modeling, remote sensing, and measurement. But what I also understand is if you know in a certain region how a soil has been managed over the last 20, 30 years, you already know a lot. And so I think what I would understand, we have quite a good understanding is how you can increase soil carbon through using certain practices. And I think what we need to incentivize are the good practices. I think it's not about that we exactly will be able and that we will get better and better to calculate the soil carbon, but I think it's about moving in the right direction. As also said, of course, maybe the benefits of soil carbon are not the biggest ones for climate, but for biodiversity, fertility, resilience. So that I think one has to look at all of them. But carbon is, from all of that, the one that can be best measured and is also best understood, I think, from a financial point of view. But we need a very sustainable carbon. That's very clear. From a climate perspective, of course, where the big ticket items are the rewetting of the drained peatlands, is agroforestry, and then forestry all over. So the above ground biomass is both as a carbon storage, but also as a future feedstock for the chemical and the construction industry. These are, in terms of the quantity, the big ticket items.
What? We had another question waiting here in line here in the front, and then another one there in the back.
Work? Yes. Thank you very much. Maybe Krystyna, to start with you. You mentioned the potential need for a regulatory framework that could empower, enable, or maybe even demand carbon farming in a certain way. Maybe could you elaborate on that a little bit? Then maybe the second level would be then to you, Christian, what your perspective as a regulator would be to that. And then zooming out, how much do you look at the rest of the world and what has been done somewhere else and maybe where Europe can learn from? Thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, just to clarify, the point I was trying to make, we obviously have a few moving pieces already that deal with carbon farming understood as carbon sequestration. We've got the voluntary element through the CRCF. We have the cap that clearly incentivizes those types of mitigation actions over emission reductions. And it seems what is needed right now is a policy instrument that deals with livestock emissions and emissions from fertilization. We obviously have the target under the effort sharing regulation. So we have targets for member states that are sort of cross-sectoral, and we're not seeing the progress that needs to be made. Member states are falling behind. So there's a clear need for a dedicated instrument for agriculture. And perhaps that would be an instrument that involves economic incentives for sector actors rather than member states. Ideally, we'd have both of them acting in tandem. So obviously, we've had discussions about an agricultural ETS, whether that's the best way to go forward. There are obviously many different opinions, but there is a clear rationale for carbon pricing in some shape or form, whether that's in the form of rewards or, the stick element. I guess that will be seen in the political process. So yeah, I hope that's.
Thanks a lot. And if there are any reactions, otherwise I will also, yes, maybe after your, no, please go ahead and then I will chip in with a sub question.
Maybe one minute to follow on Krystyna. I think what is important is that whatever policy we are thinking of is that we involve the whole value chain. I think it's often too much focused on the farmer, but it's like you guys, it's the food industry, but it's also the fertilizer producers, it's the feed producers, and we need to engage the whole value chain. Because sometimes, yeah, if things change, it's also about the processing. Where is the processing, and can I maybe if I change the crop, and so on. So this is really why, and also when we look at these models, how such future regulatory approaches could look like. We have very much a value chain view, and very much aware of the discussion about, okay, what is the market position, what is the market power of the farmer, and how can we also improve that one. On the international, yes, Like we have one big research project that we are financing, or CASA, and they are bringing really from all over the world the experiences on carbon farming together. They are also trying to develop kind of an international standard, or comparing the MRV. So what I find, for example, super interesting is from what I learned from the USA on that they have a project one, I think, in the University of Michigan. The guys are really trying to take all the available data that they have and kind of achieve a meta model of soil, how soil behaves based on all available data. So I think there's a lot on the approaches that we can learn, and I think it's all over the world, probably, as you also know, that people are thinking about how can we better manage our soil and make it more resilient.
A lot. Actually wanted to revert to something that Krystyna mentioned, that is, and to ask a question for Edwin, and then also for the panel at large regarding the possible inclusion of the agricultural sector in the ETS, emission trading scheme, here in Europe. What is your take from the perspective of farmers and agri-cooperatives? Would it create a fairer pricing for farmers? Would it pose risks? Let's start with Edwin, and then happy to hear a reaction from everyone here.
ETS is a hard discussion within the agricultural sector, whether it will fit on a farm level, and it has to do with the fact that we have biological emissions, and in the end, and that has been stated here before, we can't reduce to zero. When you want to have food production in the EU, you have to allow us some emissions, which makes it difficult to capture that within a system that now applies to industry. And there's a difficulty about that, and you have to think about how can you create a system that incentivizes farmers to do the things they can in reducing their impact, but to do that in a fair way, taking in hindsight that yes, you have emissions that come to food, and at some point in the future we will have to have a discussion in the EU of how our food palette should look like. That is an inevitable discussion, because in the end that will determine how much emissions we are allowed to have as an agricultural sector, and then we can take next steps.
Are there any reactions to that?
Yes, I mean, it's super interesting. We are starting a discussion. We are seeing different approaches in member states, like in Denmark, that are going forward with carbon pricing for the agriculture sector in a very inclusive approach, and in a very, like, how to take the whole sector together. And what I also like in very much talking about, okay, what is the vision for where do we want to be in 2050? And as you say, this is very clear. There's a potential for emission reductions, but this is more limited than in other sectors. But we should address that potential as well. And of course, I think when we talk about food security, but also biomass availability, what we need both. It needs to fit the European demand. So I think these two cannot be out of balance. In particular, when we discuss now all the new geopolitical situation, our sovereignty, food security, but also the security of biomass supply, like that we don't import anymore. For example, Russian wood, for the moment, has a big impact on the harvesting that we are seeing in Europe, in that carbon stock. So these are all quite important discussions, and this we need to see how do we give there the best incentives? And as I said before, how do we involve the whole value chain into this? Yeah, and that will be from our side, I think, it will be an ongoing discussion, and it will be, I think, again, when we look towards 2040, 2050, and we will talk about climate policy, we will talk a lot about the bioeconomy. And this is also what the Commission will come with a new bioeconomy strategy. By the end of this year, we will have the agri-food vision next week, and then we need to put that together and yeah, really look forward. How will a climate neutral economy look like, in which we don't use any more fossil carbon, but we still have food and biogenic carbon? It will be a different economy than we have now.
Thanks a lot. Yes, can hear another reaction from Krystyna.
Yeah, so just very briefly on the ETS question. I just want to put out a couple of comments on a design that doesn't get a lot of traction among stakeholders. So as Christian said, we really want to make sure that the whole agri-food value chain is involved in the sustainable transition of the sector. But I think there are often benefits of an on-farm ETS. And I'm mentioning this because there's been work by the expert group in Denmark that concluded that putting at the point of obligation on farm is the most efficient way to go about it. And this is just to say there are ways of designing an on-farm ETS, whether this is through free allocation or de minimis thresholds, that could potentially help rebalance the power differentials in the sector, preserve the sector in terms of the number of small farms that are there, and also could provide a source of revenue that could be returned to the sector. So this is just to comment on that.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, quite a broad topic and delicate, but also timely discussion on the inclusion of agriculture in ETS. Are there any other questions? Yes, we had a question there in the back, and then another one.
Good afternoon. My name is Mathieu Mal. I work for the European Environmental Bureau, and I have a question that goes towards the socio-economic effects potentially of carbon farming. And it's really for anyone on the panel who would like to reflect on this. It has been said that carbon farming is a long-term game because accumulating soil organic carbon is something that requires steady long-term efforts. It's also been said that farmers need kind of long-term certainty, regulatory certainty, to be able to commit to these kind of changes and investments. But if I'm not mistaken, about half of the farmland in the EU is rented and not owned by the farmers that do work the land. So I was wondering if there are some reflections on what this might mean for the uptake of carbon farming, because we're asking farmers to invest in the long term in land and increase the value of an asset, let's say, that they actually don't own. So then who in the end gets the benefit of implementing these practices? Thank you.
Point. Would anyone like to take that question?
No. I think that's what I already said before. What I find super interesting is like if you have a really more landscape approach, and you really see at the local level, how can you get together not only a farm but more farms? And I think there we see a lot already. Happening. Cooperatives, you mentioned, much easier to cover risk, administrative costs. We have in the CRCF this idea of a group operator. So I think in particular if you also look maybe more in the Mediterranean and so on, I mean, we have a lot of abandoned marginal land that could be better used. We have the challenge with forests. We have a lot of smallholder forests that are not well managed. So I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm very keen to see maybe also different ways of how you can get organized at the local level. So for example, in Germany, I understand when we talk about the rewetting of peatlands, there would be public water bodies who could play a big role. We see already in the Netherlands some approaches with cooperatives. We have private non-profit organizations, or also for-profit organizations that are trying to play that role of putting more landowners together. And then, like within this group of operators and so on, you would then also share the benefits of it, and that I found also would be a very clever and smart way how to reward the first movers. Because the first movers, what is their biggest asset? It's the knowledge that they have, because they know how this can be done in this region. And we should give them, and I guess if you're a first mover, you are entrepreneurial. So, and we should give them a good incentive that they share their knowledge with their neighbors. So I would be very keen to see what are different models on how that could work at the local level, and that they may be very different depending on the region. So you have a European carbon market, but how it's done at the local level, also, as you say, also depending on the property rights that you have, and they are also very different across Europe, so that you find solutions at the local level, how this is best implemented.
Yes, I think you're addressing a very good point, which has been proven over and over again, that when you don't take care of the fact who gets the revenues in the end, you have to start that in a design phase, because what we saw happening when the cap went to a hectare premium is that a lot of people that rented out the land allowed themselves to have at least half of that money, because it was in the end their soil, in their opinion. And I think that those that do the work when it comes to capturing carbon, being busy with carbon farming in one way or another, should reap all the benefits. And in the end, the landowner will end up with land that's for the better, but the revenues of doing all the work should go to the farmer, and you have to take care of that in the design phase, because if you want to correct it when the system is already in place, you're far too late. So yeah, I would advocate for thinking about that right now. Thank you.
And also, definitely, it's very, very valid point, because every time when you talk about permanency, that's definitely an issue, because if you maybe just rent the land, you have maybe a 5 years contract and so on, and the scheme is longer, how to handle this, how to hand over, will you be penalized? So that's also why I think also a lot of, starting with CAP, but also other schemes have really to sacrifice the operations, because the farmer at the end of the day is putting every year the risk into that one, right? He's investing into all the inputs, he's doing the work and so on. The landowner, definitely he owns the land, but he stays back relaxed and just gets this incentive of a guaranteed income maybe. And I think here it's a fair share, I think, towards the farmer, which I would also personally advocate, really, to be honest, really to look a bit more into those operational benefits and not into just the ownership itself, because that led already to a lot of investors going into that and making the life for farmers much more complicated. So I think we really should see it more totally holistically in the society here, really, which kind of contract we want to have and how really also the farmers play the role, because often they are squeezed. So that's also what, even with food value chain, things that get commodities somehow brings another hurdle, another burden, like every administrative layer and so on. That's also what we get back from farmers. Please protect us from putting, again, everything on us, but we do not get more for commodity. But we have more work, we have more invest, we have more risk.
Very fair points raised. I think we can take one final question before we wrap up, and we had already, yes, gentlemen lined up.
Thank you. So my name is Hins Boonstra. I work for Bayer Crop Science. The topic that was just addressed is very interesting. So I'm sorry that I'm going back to the discussion that we had earlier. What we see in the voluntary markets, a lot of enthusiasm, but I'm afraid it's not enough to really ramp up what it is that we want. So I'm very curious to see where we end up somewhere in July when we have the results of the second, Trinomics report discussion. What I would like to know is, do we have a timeline? Is there an ambition? When do we want to move to a more compliant situation? In the Sustainable Carbon Cycles report, we said now, I think it was around 2030. Yeah, Is that still the idea, or do we already have ideas for compliance instruments which might come this term, although the Commission said that they do not want to be very ambitious with new regulatory proposals? So I'm very curious where we are in this respect, because we need it. I mean, only voluntary is just simply not enough.
I'm assuming this is a question for DG CLIMA.
Yes, but I would like to hear also, of course, the others that have experience, whether they also feel that it's good to have, well, not only, well, use nice words, but also a stick.
Thanks.
And maybe as I also mentioned at the beginning, so it's picking up, but the speed definitely can get accelerated. And it's both for digital as well as for carbon, I would say both, right? So definitely the benefits are clear. I think there's a lot of justification for both means really to have much better resilient agriculture in both ways, and also this differentiated income scheme also for farmers. But at the end of the day, right, I think just voluntarily is not enough, both from the food value chain side, because at the end of the day, someone has also to incentivize that one. It's good that also EU also steps up somehow, maybe to build some framing, also like in France, label carbon, where we have some schemes already where even the government steps in a bit also to fill in the gap, at least maybe for a while even. So that's something, but yeah, I think definitely, and that's, I think for the whole players, so all stakeholders, it's more, okay, what's coming really, when will it become more, yeah, fact that you need to do it and not just that it's voluntary. That's definitely something where some more push might be there really to drive it faster. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a small example from Dutch reality where I am from. We have a few projects in place that already give carbon certificates, not within the EU system, but still farmers putting in effort to store carbon and a market being created. What we saw was when economy was booming, there was a lot of interest. But as this involuntary market and economy isn't doing that well at this moment, then the market is tanking. And the farmers are in it for the long haul and are stuck with having done all the efforts. And when you don't take care, the carbon goes up into the air again, which is not what you want. The effort is gone and the market is gone, or the market prices are at a level that make it unsustainable to keep on doing the good things. So yeah, it's a danger, and it's too little, and we have to make sure that the market is there and will be there even if the economy tanks.
I can tell you about some upcoming milestones. Or we will have next week the vision on agri-food. We will have in the second quarter the climate law that should give the ambition for 2040, which is another important milestone. We will have hopefully the conclusion of green claims by June, July, which should also bring more clarity to the voluntary carbon market. And of course, this year there will be also the proposal on the next MFF. Will also have impacts on how will the public financing under the common agricultural policy look like. And we will have by the end of this year the bioeconomy strategy, I think, which is also an important milestone. And then in 26 should be coming all our climate policy proposals for 2040. So the review of the emission trading system, the review of LULUCF, of the effort sharing regulation, so the whole package. And I think these are the opportunities where this commission will make proposals on climate action.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we cannot take any more questions now because we are finalizing. And as we wrap up, I would also like to ask one final question to all of you. Maybe we could start with Edwin and then come this way towards me, which is what would be the most critical action that the EU should take in the current legislative cycle to ensure that carbon farming contributes meaningfully to net zero targets while also securing benefits for European farmers?
only one thing, and that is make sure that the carbon system we create within Europe makes it bankable. So it makes a business case I can take to the bank and I can use to make my investments. It's a big one.
Yeah, I think I can also keep it short. So just to add on, so there must be reliable rules that I think the market really can adhere to, because at the end of the day, it's invest from all players. It's downstream the food value chain. It's from solution providers like us. It's from the farmers somehow. So this kind of reliability over the next 10 years at least somehow that should be given.
No, very much agree. And this is also what I hope that the certification can contribute to is that we have a quantification of the value of nature and the things that farmers are doing. And by this, that it's much easier for a bank to see what are the monetary benefits of what is coming from a more sustainable land management. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an ideal case scenario, which would be presumably having a very clear pathway for the agricultural sector, which would involve clear emission reduction and carbon removal targets when it comes to agricultural activities. But in terms of what's politically feasible, I think it would be great if the public funding that is currently going towards the sector, if there was a real rethinking of how it can be used to really support advisory services and knowledge provision in a way that aligns with the low carbon transition.
Thank you very much for this final input. I think today's discussion has highlighted quite well that carbon farming brings promise and also complexity at the same time that should be dealt with adequately. We touched upon some of the most crucial issues, including the regulatory and financial framework that is needed to deliver these benefits, and also how to balance potential trade-offs with biodiversity, food security, and rural livelihoods, but also how to manage risks inherent with potential greenwashing of emissions that could have been reduced at the source, including within the same agricultural sector. I think we covered quite a lot of ground, and still this conversation must continue to ensure that clear and enforceable policies and fair financial mechanisms enable the potential for carbon farming to become a tool in the race towards climate neutrality. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to today's panelists for your great insights, as well as to you all for your engagement. If you like this content, please consider subscribing to our newsletter and following our social pages to receive updates on our upcoming events and publication. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.